Accountability is an number one thing that managers have to do. Management exists to help facilitate people doing the things that they might otherwise not do. Sales is hard. And there's a lot of behaviors in sales that are like uncomfortable and unpleasant. If it feels easy and enjoyable, it's probably not good from a growth standpoint.
Sales is always going to be hard. If you don't want a hard profession, maybe look at a different profession.
If you don't have that accountability loop, all sorts of other kind of like unpleasant things come to roost.
Technology for sellers has often been a godsend and a curse.
Cold calling is a lower complexity, repetitive behavior that then trains capacity for a higher complexity behavior that is really important. But if you don't do the low complexity behavior, you're probably not well suited to do this. So it's almost like doing this is a requirement, even if there might be a way of like better automating it.
Behind the scenes, it was a small group of people that were doing everything.
Welcome back to the GTM podcast. It's your host, Scott Barker.
I want to know how this insane growth actually happened. How much time are your sales reps wasting on manual tasks at the end of every sales call? How confident are you that your team has full visibility into the pipeline? Are you sure no deals are slipping through the cracks? Staying on top of every opportunity is tough, and that's why we're thrilled to partner with Attention. Attention's AI-powered call recording platform ensures that your deals are executed flawlessly. Records your calls, generates next step summaries, action items, and even creates scorecards for every single call, so your reps can continuously improve. But that's really just the beginning. Attention's generalized insights allow you to ask any question across all of your conversations. Think of it like ChatGPT for your sales calls. And the magic doesn't stop there. Attention also lets you build automated workflows tailored to your needs. For example, if a customer mentions they're at risk of churning during a call, Attention can automatically loop in a sales director or a solutions engineer to ensure that customer receives the full white glove treatment, reducing churn, keeping your business thriving. Attention is helping companies onboard reps faster, increase the productivity of their existing teams, and giving revenue leaders unparalleled visibility into their pipelines, all while automating those tedious, dreaded manual tasks. If any of those challenges sound familiar, I highly recommend checking them out at attention.tech.
We are live. Hello and welcome back to the GTM podcast. Excited to be having this conversation. I feel like this one is long overdue. I can't believe we haven't had you on the pod yet. I am joined by my man, Pete Kazanjy. Pete, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I still can't get over how beautiful your office is. Makes me want to fly. It makes me want to hop on a plane and fly up to Vancouver and go hang out, catch a Canucks game with you.
Man, let's make it happen. I usually give people like 3 guesses of where the background is because a lot of people comment on it, and very, very few people ever guess Vancouver.
You can tell it's like there's I'm dating myself, but like there's Neo and Trinity from the Matrix like jumping between buildings behind you.
Yeah, Hollywood North, baby. This is where where it's all happening. There's a story in there for another day, but I did some acting as a child in a bunch of little commercials up here. It's a big scene. So quickly for our listeners, I always like to do a super quick bio. Most folks, I would like to think, are familiar with the name Pete Kazanjy. Is a serial founder and go-to-market expert. He co-founded TalentBin, a talent search engine that was acquired by Monster. And then after that acquisition, really transitioned to become an advisor, a thought leader in sales and go-to-market strategies, and co-founding both Modern Sales Pros, which is an incredible community of, I think, 35,000 plus now, Atrium HQ, AI-driven sales performance management software, and found time to write a little book along the way called Founding Sales.
Just for fun.
Just for fun. How was the book writing process? I feel like that always feels like a good idea, and I bet it's way more work than you think.
Well, the first 90% took a certain amount of time, but then the second 90% took twice as long. So it's always the problem. No, I think I started, when my background actually is in product management and product marketing. I started my career at a company called VMware, almost about 20 years ago right now. And so when, when I started TalentBin, I went from being like a business generalist founder to our first seller for sales management, for sales manager, for sales leader. Um, Mainly kind of like realizing, hey, this like software stuff doesn't sell itself. I guess that needs to be me. And of course, this was like back in 2011. There wasn't a lot of like writing on this. And so founding sales was essentially the book that I wish existed to kind of like help first time sellers, founders, et cetera, who like don't know what the heck they're doing. There's a lot more material available now, but like back then there really wasn't. And of course now there's my book. But that's what it exists for. And so what's funny though is like people end up kind of telling me all the time. They're like, "Hey, I was a sales leader at a public company, and then I went back to be like a sales leader at like a Series A startup, and I had to like remember all the things that like gets done for you." Like
Mm-hmm.
a big
Mm-hmm.
like Series D or public company. It's just like, oh yeah, the decks are already done, the disco questions are already written, we had force management do XYZ. And it's like now they have to do it, and they're like, yeah, founding sales is really helpful for that. Also very helpful for me to like give my CEO who doesn't understand shit about sales and like be like, hi, read this because you're not understanding our pain points right now. So anyway, it worked out. Took a long time, but it worked out.
Yeah. Is that what you think the biggest downfall of folks stepping into like an early stage sales leadership role is just not having the understanding of how in the weeds they're going to have to be to actually drive success?
I don't know. I mean, that's certainly one of the things. Another thing would probably, at least, especially in the last 5 years, is like jumping into like a early stage startup that like has no semblance of product market fit whatsoever. But like a bunch of people have been buying the software because like they were stuffed full of free internet money for once, like ZERP money, etc. So like could be like six of one, half dozen of the other, et cetera, et cetera. But like yeah, I mean, I think early stage go to market, whether you're talking about like a sales leader at a Series A company or a Series B company or a Series C company, um, in general, it's always going to be way more hands on than you're anticipating. And the same is true kind of in the inverse situation where like you have a founder who's like, yeah, I'm gonna have someone else figure out this sales motion for me. And it's like, no, you're not. You're gonna have to figure that out on your own, and you're gonna have to be extraordinarily like hands-on and to quote Paul Graham, like very founder mode on that. So I think Lemkin talks about this quite a bit.
Yeah, he's got some great content on it. Let's get right into it because there's a lot I want to kind of pick your brain on and get your thoughts. And first is there's no getting around it. Broadly speaking, sales performance at software companies is down pretty aggressively. I hear of very few teams where folks are consistently meeting or exceeding quota. I think it is an extraordinarily hard time to be in sales right now. And market conditions aside, because obviously that is playing a massive factor, what other driving forces are making this happen?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this because, like, Atrium makes sales performance management software. We have hundreds of customers. Like, we talk with customers all the time about like their performance management initiatives. 3 or 4 years ago, performance management was kind of a dirty word, and like that was kind of frustrating to us. Like, obviously, we were a beneficiary of loose budgets as well in like 2020, 21, 2021, 2022. But on the flip side, a lot of organizations were not like super bought into the concept of like accountability and performance management and like those sort of things, kind of more granular performance management. And that's changed quite a bit in the last like 12 months, 18 months. Sorry. It has changed at the C level, it's changed at the VP level, whether the manager level and certainly like the IC level has kind of like gotten religion around a shift in like performance requirements. That's still kind of like a work in progress. But I think the reality is that it's all market driven, and you might be like, oh, like what do you mean by that? Well, like they're just like I've given a presentation. I have this like big presentation that I give on this called the sales performance gap. And like it kind of crystallizes what I view as a number of these kind of drivers that's driving underperformance. And a really big one is zero interest rate policy, right? That happened, in the run up to COVID, but then really happened during COVID. And so that did a number of things, right? Like one of the things that it did was it like pushed a ton of money into the ecosystem. And so what that meant was like all of a sudden now you had like a bunch of willing buyers because they knew that they had money, right? And so what do willing buyers do? Well, they do demo requests, right? And they respond to outbound BDRs. And then they take those disco meetings and then they advance and then they buy, right? And so like this all had like very positive impacts on on set rates, on conversion rates, on win rates, and of course on attainment. And then it also kind of had a little bit of negative impacts as relates to like, the levels of effort and performance that were required in order to do that, right? And I think that like what you have going over the last like 2 years is just like this huge adjustment to, in early 2023 and through the end of 23, interest rates from 0% to like 5.5%. And like now we're sitting at like, I think 5-ish or whatever. And like that adjustment is just like slowly making its way through the entire ecosystem. And like different people are at different kind of like levels of updating their priors. Like a lot of ICs are like, hey, wait a minute. I thought that like this was the land of getting promoted from SDR to AE in 6 months. Or like, hey, I thought that like I hit my OTE is like more or less guaranteed without breaking a sweat. And I think if you talk to people who are like old and crusty who came up in like, were started in sales or what have you, like maybe at the great financial crisis, like 2009 or 2010 or 2011, 2012, people are just like, yeah, this is how this was. This is what sales is. Like people talk about sales being hard. Like this is what sales is. And I think that people who came up in like, the 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and then certainly in 2020, 2021, 2022, there's just a lot of adjustment that needs to happen there. And it takes a while for people to adjust.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think I see expectations around comp and effort level are just a little out of whack. And in fairness to maybe some of those folks that started their career in the ZERP era or the large majority of their career in the ZERP era, I think when times were good, we didn't train and enable them the way that maybe we should have. And I'm seeing right now one of the reactions to tightening budgets also means that sales training budgets are disappearing and being cut, across the board. And, we were talking before this, but I recently read that Salesforce, who has this 5K education budget per employee, sellers are no longer allowed to use that on sales training, which is kind of crazy to me.
They can use it on cooking classes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How do you suggest like we right that ship? Like sales managers or sales leaders that are listening to this, like, do we have to be hardline and go fight my CEO for a sales training budget and just make that a non-negotiable?
I think so. I give this presentation with Thiago Safrer, who's the president at OpenGov, who's super awesome. He was the CRO at Chorus, and then he was the head of sales at Huddle for a long time. He's awesome. And then AJ Gandhi, who's the chief growth officer at Marlin Equity at Lean Data's OpStars. And AJ had a really good point, and he was just like, look, I think that we're, across the board, we're probably like 30% to 50% over indexed on sales headcount as compared to like marketing behavior. And so the reason I share that is like historically, so imagine you have a scenario where you're hiring a bunch of reps in 2021 and you have a bunch of buyers who have like money in their pocket, just like burning a hole in their pocket. Do those sellers do they need to be very good? No, right? Like they need to be a warm body. And the same is true with like SDRs or what have you. And so I think like you can understand why people kind of approach things the way that they did in 2021 and 2022. Now, what has kind of like reasserted itself is like now it's a lot harder to sell. You have way more scrutiny, larger budgetary kind of like buying committees, et cetera, which just introduces all sorts of things like, oh, okay, cool. There's going to be like 5 people involved in a $20,000 transaction. Yes, there are. So like you're going to have to be really good at, building a business case or multi-threading or what have you. Oh, I've never had to do this before. I understand. Makes sense. Cool. We're going to now have to teach you about that and then also performance manage you on that. Oh boy, can I do that with 8 reps reporting to me? Maybe not. Maybe you should have like 5 reps reporting to you, and maybe 3 of those reps should go away, the lowest 3 performers. And then you should redirect your managerial resources, right? Because like think about a manager as like a very expensive piece of software that costs like, $200,000 or like $250,000, like whatever it is, divided out by the number of reps that you have. Like you need to redirect that software to making these individuals like more performant, because otherwise, the thing that got them, the thing that drove success in like 2021, 2022 is not the thing that's going to have them be successful right now. And I think that this is something that we're just seeing across the board. It's like a big kind of like return to basics, if you will, around things like accountability, performance metrics, activity metrics, those sort of things. And then also just holding people accountable for that. This was another really big thing during like 2021, 2022. Let's say that you're, a grumpy, crusty, sales manager, like with a App Dynamics, PTC, MongoDB background or what have you, John McMahon, coaching tree, et cetera, and you're like, hey man, like I want to drive a bunch of accountability, like I want to keep a high level of like a high standard of excellence, et cetera. Kind of hard to do in 2021 and 2022 because people might be like, man, like why are you up in my business? Like I'm just going to go work at this other company over here that's promised me a 50% higher OTE with like a 6-month draw, and like they're going to be very and so as a result, like as a manager, people were starting to get like more and more hands off because you didn't want to lose that quota capacity, right? And of course that's like not a good thing because like now you have like it feels good in the moment to have like managers not be on the front foot and like maybe more laissez-faire, but ultimately in the long run it's like not as good, right? It's kind of like it's like failing the marshmallow test, right? And so I think that people are rebasing there and be like, okay, cool, like the thing to do right now is for managers to really buckle down and get on the front foot with respect to performance management and accountability and coaching. Even though that's the thing in 2021 or 2022 that like might have led to repetition. The reality is like there's probably like 1/3 of the hiring happening right now than there was in 2021 and 2022. And so just like the same way that ICs need to update their priors, like managers need to update their priors as well and be like, okay, cool. Like management in a 5% interest rate environment is very different than management in a 0% interest rate environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's continue down that path a little bit. So it feels like, at least in the beginning of my career, managers were there to coach you, to jump in and help when needed, and maybe motivation was a pretty big thing.
Sure.
And then it seemed to sort of evolve as RevTech grew into sort of dashboard managing a little bit. Are we leading, the activity indicators that are going to hopefully drive closed won deals in the end? And then we kind of had this weird little shift into more of like a cultural leader and make sure everyone's happy, and we're doing Zoom happy hours and let's make everyone feel heard and where do you think we're at today, and what makes a most effective sales manager today?
I think the thing is that like the latter thing of like being a cheerleader is great. Like that shouldn't go away. Sales is hard. Like the way we were actually talking about this earlier today in a team meeting. Is when I like at Atrium, we talk about performance management, right? A lot of people talk about coaching, and I like to say like, well, hold on a second. Like, coaching is just one thing that a manager does, right? What a manager does is they need to, so like, especially in sales, first and foremost, like sales is hard. And there's a lot of behaviors in sales that are like uncomfortable and unpleasant. Like, think about SDRs. And I know that, you guys historically had a relationship with outreach, what have you. Like, sales engagement software was both a godsend and also kind of a curse insofar as like now you could do pipe gen without this hard thing, which is cold calling, right? And we'll put that aside. That's another thing that kind of like deteriorated sales performance, kind of like chops. But the point was is that like, cold calling is uncomfortable. It's hard. And so if you don't have someone kind of looking over your shoulder and saying like, hey, we have to do this thing, it's important for us to do it, these are the activity levels that are required, these are the conversion rates that we would expect here, generally speaking, most people, except for like the most like self-managed and kind of like psychopathic hardos, are probably going to avoid that behavior, right? And that's why you need a manager to like have that accountability loop in there. So accountability is an number one thing that managers have to do. Now, like they should also, if you have accountability where you have someone who's like doing the activity, but for whatever reason, like they're doing the dials, they're getting a bunch of connects, but they're not getting any sets. Okay, cool. Well, that's where coaching comes in, is like diagnosing that and saying, oh, okay, cool. Like, you're doing the dials, you're getting a bunch of connects, but you're not getting sets. Lovely. Let's go ahead and upskill you there. And then the last thing that that is really important part of management is encouragement, right? And celebration. And I think it's like three legs of a stool. And if you drop one, like as an example, I think in the last like 2 to 3 years, the accountability, or sorry, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, the accountability leg kind of went away. Instead, what you have is just like, encouragement. And I think people have kind of talked about this quite a bit. Like, if you're encouraging people without redirecting them, like, hey, good job, good effort, right? People are not being upskilled, right? And so I think the good news is that kind of a healthy balance is reasserting itself, where people are now holding folks accountable, like, hey, you're not doing your dials, or you're not doing your customer facing meetings, or accounting. A lot of organizations are downsizing their SDR function and certainly spending a lot less on Google Ads or like LinkedIn or what have you. Hey, you need to be doing your pipe gen, right? Account executives. And so if you're not, I'm going to hold you accountable to that. And we're going to have we have weekly performance check-ins, or we have biweekly performance check-ins. And I'm going to look at that. I'm going to say like, dude, you're not doing your PG activity. Like, come on. Because if you don't have that accountability loop, all sorts of other kind of like unpleasant things come to roost, right? Not just does that person not get better, and then ultimately like their outputs won't get there, but also creates a huge problem in the rest of your team, where when you have people who like are doing their behaviors that they are supposed to be doing, they're going to see that other people aren't doing it, and that's going to erode esprit de corps and what have, because like nobody wants to be on a team that like allows laggards to lag. And this is something that I get like yelled at about a bunch on like Twitter and LinkedIn. People are like, well, only like, the best AEs are self-directed. The best AEs will do that. It's like, yeah, but like if you have 100 salespeople in your organization, or like 50 people in your sales organization, like you can't make your policies for the top 10%. Like, your policies have to apply to everybody. And that's where you get like sales managerial playbooks and kind of like goal sets for like, weekly, monthly, and quarterly goals, just to make it paint by numbers for the managers. Because otherwise you have what we refer to as artisanal management, that you might have people who are just like naturally like great managers who drive accountability and do coaching and have encouragement. But if you're relying on managers who have maybe come up in the last 5 years, and like maybe they've learned what management is in a ZERP era, or they've been fed via like LinkedIn platitudes, they probably don't know what good like rigorous performance management looks like. And so as a leader, you need to put that in place for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love the move back to accountability. I think it's healthy for everyone. We're going to
Yeah,
have, people building the skills that they need to succeed long term in their career. That's going to turn into,
exactly.
more
Yes.
closed revenue. And you mentioned something there, and, technology for sellers has often been a godsend and a curse, as you put it. You had the
It's
outreaches
so
of the world.
hard. Yeah, it's so
It's
hard,
super
man.
hard. And my
Yeah.
question to you was, we're about to have a whole lot of AI agents, co-pilots. I know Agent Force went GA last week. Salesforce's agentic AI platform. I think it's free for anyone with an enterprise license. So all of a sudden, boom, everyone's got an AI agent. Is that going to help or compound this problem?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that I could see it cutting two ways. So Paul Graham had a good essay about this weekend about the rights and the right nots, like kind of like haves and have nots. Um, and he was talking about it in the context of like how writing is, a mechanism for thinking. It helps people kind of like think and synthesize things and what have you. And if all of a sudden now you have a situation wherein you can get other things to think, or sorry, to write for you, maybe it deteriorates the ability of people to think for themselves, which I buy the argument. Um, and I find myself like I use Gong. Like we at Atrium use Gong. It's great software. And I kind of find myself not being as diligent as I should be when it comes to taking notes and synthesizing my notes, because you kind of know like, Gong's going to get it. It's going to synthesize it. It's going to be great, right? It's going to be close enough. And so I think that in general, anytime you can have something that automates a behavior that that is important, then you can have a situation where like a muscle that might maybe historically was useful might then never be built, right? Like cold calling is a great example of this. And in this case, like if cold calling never was needed again, and instead like sales engagement software always worked, and like email response rates and open rates and what have you hadn't been tanking as a result of the success of sales engagement software, then maybe it wouldn't matter that like cold calling behavior has like the muscles for cold calling has deteriorated. But the reality is that like cold calling is a mechanism by which you get good at like face-to-face communication and synchronous communication, which ends up being very important for sales. And so it's like training ground for that, which now is absent. And so I think I worry about the automation behaviors that we're talking about as relates to AI agents or what have you. And so my hope is that the best behaviors, like it doesn't just automate the entirety of like the job to be done, but instead, you know, levers the individual, and then also runs them through the paces, if you will. So like I'm a big fan of a lot of the AI role playing software that's out there. Um, but then I think that the challenge, of course, there is like that actually, people actually have to use that and go through it, like kind of get in the batting cage or go to the gym, if you will. Um, I think I approach this like somewhat trepidatious, like the same way that like TikTok and Instagram Reels have really deteriorated the ability of like junior, like new grads to read long form content. Um, I worry about the same thing from a productive language and like writing and kind of communication standpoint versus just a consumption standpoint. So we'll see. I'm nervous.
You and me both, for sure. And I do want to say I love the kind of AI avatar role playing. We made investment in Avara, and
Hmm,
I think
nice.
I would like that to me. Like I know role playing and stuff, some people are uncomfortable with it in a group setting, but like this like gets away from all of that and like do this in the
Yeah,
comfort of your own space, your own time. But like I need you to get 100
gotta do
at
it though.
bats before
Yeah,
before
do it.
you do it,
Yep, gotta do it. Right.
yeah. And I would just mandate that. If I was ever leading a sales team again, I would just be like, you need to talk to 100 of our buyers in this AI setting before you're ever on a phone call. And that's
Yep.
that's it. And I'll be able to see
Yeah.
if you have or not.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. But it's again kind of like one of those like eat your Wheaties, eat your spinach sort of things. Um, and so yes, I think it's actually something that has fallen off of the onboarding behavior because it's like laborious, right? Like doing live call coaching or like role playing with a manager is like very laborious. Like Atrium, I think during the ZERP era, we probably hired I hired and onboarded like 10-ish sellers or maybe like 15-ish sellers or what have you. And essentially like doing like 20, you know, 5 disco calls or like 10 disco calls per rep, five demo calls, 10, like, no, did it wrong, stop, do it again, start over, et cetera, et cetera. It's like highly laborious. The alternative is not good, right? But it is like very laborious. And I think that like making sure that, but it is uncomfortable, right? And so like I think part of that is, and what I mean is like this, it's uncomfortable for the seller to do it, and so if it's not like instrumented and like performance managed, they're probably gonna shirk shirk that, which is why you have to have accountability around it. Now that being said, I think oftentimes sellers are nervous to look dumb in front of their manager, and so having a thing that like a mock AI for that call training can be a little bit more comfortable because like it doesn't feel like you're being judged by an individual. But I still think it's also one of those things where it's like, man, probably more fun to scroll work TikTok, LinkedIn than it is to do my disco training with like this mean AI bot. So it's just like, hey
Yeah.
man, like again, we management exists to help facilitate people doing the things that they might otherwise not do if they knew that they didn't have like Big Brother or their older brother, their older sister, their uncle, their boss, etc. Kind of uh, like helping them out and managing them because it's just human nature, right? Like we avoid things that are unpleasant.
Yeah, totally. You also said something there that I think is really interesting for people to think about is when we automate things like cold calling, for example, we're also robbing our sellers or our folks of like the skill byproduct that comes from that. So like cold
Well
calling,
said. Skill
grit
byproduct.
and
I love it.
effectively thinking on your feet in like kind of a high risk, high stakes environment. Like those are really
Totally.
hard skills to
Totally.
learn unless you have a ton of at bats. And
Yep.
when we think about AI agents, one of the easiest use cases to think about is like your follow up, emails all done for you. And, one of the most important jobs, as we all know, is like discovery in a sales call. And you're not going to be listening as hard and you're not going to connect the dots.
Mhm.
And I think of it, through my lens right now, which is as an investor. I will get off the
Yeah.
phone with an incredible
Yeah.
founder and I'll be like, wow, yeah, this is probably worth spending more time and resources to do more diligence. And then I'll go through the process of writing the deal memo. And that process of me writing the deal memo, I'll hit certain lines in it and I'll be like, oh,
Wait a minute.
actually, this isn't what I thought it was. And then I start connecting some dots because I went
Right,
through that
because you're
exercise.
because you're thinking, you're synthesizing
Yeah.
it, right? Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally hear you.
And if there was a button where I could just be like, write my deal memo, that would be actually a big net negative because I would miss connecting those dots. And just like sellers, like you're going to then spend a bunch of time maybe with the wrong buyer,
Mhm. Yep. This is the thing that makes me a little bit nervous about these things. It's like the way that Paul Graham kind of characterized it in his essay, The Right and Right Nots, is back in the day, pre-industrial revolution, people's jobs made them strong, right? Like if you were plowing the field or doing your blacksmith thing or what have you. And so nowadays most people don't have like very like high like labor, like muscular labor, right? Jobs. And so then the people who are strong, you have to go to the gym in order to be strong, right? And so people, or like to be in shape, you have to actually choose to go do the thing, which is, it's another. It doesn't happen as a byproduct. As I really enjoyed how you kind of characterize that, you have to make a decision to do that because it's like good for you or what have you. And I think there's a fair point here, which is like, hey, you're going to have to elect to do this thing, and the reason why you're going to do that is because it's good for you. And I think the interesting question there is like, will it be good for you? Like, will it be required, et cetera? My sense is that it probably should be. Like thinking will probably continue to be good, hopefully.
I hope so.
Yeah, because like this is what we want to do. Like, but this is what sellers are supposed to be doing, right? Like we're supposed to be thinking about like what's the current state in their organization, like what are the needs that they're going to have, what are the needs that they think they have, what are the needs that they probably have but maybe don't realize that they have yet, and then like how distributed is this information within the organization? Like, does this stakeholder realize that they have the problem, but these other stakeholders over here don't have that realization? And like, do these people hate each other? Like all those sort of things that like we as sellers have to like puzzle out. That requires a lot of like cognitive puzzling, right? And like deciphering. And if you're not if you're not well attuned to that, if you haven't been doing your, haven't been in the batting cage, haven't been doing your at bats, I really worry about people's ability to like, to do that without, doing the grunt work or the grit work required in order to like build those muscles. Kind of related to what you were saying about the cold calling. Cold calling is like a lower complexity like repetitive behavior that then trains capacity for a higher complexity behavior that is really important. But if you don't do the low complexity behavior, you're probably not going to be well suited to do this. So it's almost like doing this as a requirement, even if there might be a way of like better automating it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is super, super interesting. And I love episodes like this where I'm like actively, thinking in real time of like, it's almost like we have to break apart what the cold call teaches us, what the discovery follow up teaches us, dissect that, and like build training or programs to facilitate that same, skill byproduct in maybe a different way that's potentially easier and more enjoyable for our sellers.
Yeah. My only concern with that is that like, I forget who was talking about this the other day. I think it might have been one of the OpenAI founders, is that like, if it feels easy and enjoyable, it's probably not good from a growth standpoint. Right.
Very true.
Like,
It's very true.
it's just the reality, right? Like,
Yeah.
if it doesn't feel effortful, if it doesn't feel uncomfortable, like it's probably, gosh, where was, I was at this private equity go to market summit in Austin a few weeks ago, and we were talking about training, and we were talking about helping reps like learn new things. And I was talking about how I had a program where we would pay people to read books. Like there was a spiff involved. There was a couple $100, and we had some people who would like just go crazy with it. Like they would, make like, $1,000 or $2,000 by reading books and then writing, and then writing their book reports on it. And there were other folks who were just like, and like the books in question, they weren't just like, silly books or whatever. They were like my book, or Corey Bray's like 5 Secrets of the Sales Coach, or Jason Jordan's Cracking the Sales Management Code. And then we had other folks who just like, they were here for like a year. They could have made like, $1,000 or $2,000, like reading a couple of books, and they just didn't do it. And so we were discussing at the table was like, oh, cool. What you need to do is you need to like micro chunk them, or like you need to make it into videos, or you need to make it into XYZ. It's just kind of like, okay, cool. Like, well, lifting these weights is heavy. So maybe what we need to do is like make the weights light so people never build the muscles. It's like, well, wait a minute. Like they kind of like, unfortunately, like loses the whole point there. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the answer is there. Like I'm not an enablement,
Yeah.
expert per se, but my hunch is that the answer is actually probably not to make it easier, but instead it to just like actually facilitate the actual doing of the less easy thing versus making it easier. Because the alternative is like people just like won't end up with the skill in question.
Yeah. So the cold hard truth is sales is always going to be hard. And if you don't want a hard profession, maybe look at a different profession because it will always be hard. It'll be different shades of hard. But
I think that's fair.
it is a uncommonly difficult profession with lots of ups and downs, and you have to be ready for that psychological and all the things that come with it. But no, I think these are the things folks need to be thinking about.
I think it well said. Well said there.
Thank you, thank you. I want to quickly go to a listener question because we get a bunch of great ones, and
Sweet.
I was just curious. I thought this was a great question, and I don't even have a great answer, so I'm hoping you have a better one.
Oh
The
man.
question is, we're picking between two sales leaders right now. One has
Okay.
much deeper category or domain expertise, but the other seems to understand the art and science of selling much better. Which candidate would you pick and why?
Got it. Well, I'm going to hit you with it depends. Shocking, but I think what I'm going to provide is like a framework by which I would think about it. So the more the more arcane and kind of like complicated the subject matter is, the more I might bias towards that person. So as an example, if it's like a very technical solution, right? Like, maybe it's security or maybe it's infrastructure or what have you. Like if this was like a Datadog adjacent or like SentinelOne adjacent or what have you, I might bias towards the person who has more subject matter expertise, especially insofar as like they'll typically have like sales motion overlap, like like ASP, the buyer, etc. Like usually, like the higher the ASP and the weirder the subject matter, the more like nooks and crannies there is in the sales motion, which will like actually end up being very important and will like trip you up if you're not aware with that. So that now, if it's a less complicated sale and like a less, like a less kind of confusing or like more less arcane, more generalized, like less technical sale, then you can imagine the latter case. But in general, I think my hunch, and I think probably the way that like a good heuristic for this could just be like average selling price, right? So like the higher the average selling price, like probably the weirder the sales motion is going to be, right? Like I'm thinking about like imagine a Workday sale or like a Datadog sale or like a or what have you versus something that's like more commodified and the subject matter isn't as complicated, but instead what you've got more of is like like importance around sales hiring and managing and what have you, then maybe you could bias towards the second bucket. But like I think in general, the thing I would bias towards is like if, in a complicated sales motion, probably somebody who has more experience in that market and at that ASP is going to be more important. And then if it's like less complicated, then someone who actually is like more generalizably good at sales management, sales leadership is probably more your bet. So that's how I would think about it depends there.
I like it. I think that was a great answer and great framework to think about it. High ACVs, complex, optimize for the category domain expertise, and then more high velocity, smaller sales price. You can go with the person that just has better sales fundamentals, if you will. I think the only thing maybe I'd throw in there I've seen too is if you are selling into a very kind of niche vertical, I think the category and domain expertise matters quite a bit too, just with like the shared language. You can, if you don't know how those,
It took a year to figure it out.
yeah, exactly. And you'll turn off a lot of, you'll just be like, you're not
you'll burn a lot of leads. Yeah,
yeah,
totally.
Exactly. I like it. All right. Final two questions as we wrap up. And thanks for the time today, man. I've really enjoyed this. First question, It's the hot take question. What is one widely held belief that revenue leaders still believe to be true that you think is bullshit or no longer serving us?
Well, I think there's a generalized kind of belief that enterprise sellers can't be performance managed, and I actually think that that's silly, and I think not only is it silly, it's also problematic because it will then leak into the rest of your organization, into your mid market, like your small enterprise, your mid market, et cetera, et cetera. I think it actually did over the last like 5 years. So when it comes to holding people accountable not just to their forecasts but also to precursors to their forecasts like pipeline advancement or like activity metrics or what have you, I think that that's something that can happen across the board, can and ought to happen across the board. And people who think that like you can't and shouldn't do that for enterprise sellers are really doing themselves and their sales organization a disservice in general.
Yeah, that's a really good call out. I think we've all been, if you've been around SaaS for a while, you've probably been a part of a team where there's two or three enterprise sellers. We'll call them Bill and Joanne, and their outside parameters. And we just let Bill and Joanne do whatever. They bring in big deals and their rules don't apply. And that's like founders will say that, CEOs will say that, VPs of sales will say that in front of the entire team. And what is that teaching people? That the best of the best don't do things the way that I'm telling you to do them. I think that is really problematic and very common.
Yep, for sure.
I like it. I like it. All right. Last question is it's the silver bullet question. We know there's no silver bullets, but what's just one go-to-market tactic or strategy that's been working for you at Atrium or any of the companies you're working with right now?
Um, I think in general, like back to basics is a big thing that can help folks. And it's like anytime I see someone posting on LinkedIn, like it's 2024, things have changed. It's kind of like, no, I don't think so. And so a good example of that, probably like one of the most tried and true examples of this would be a day for pipeline generation. I think it's super powerful. So PG, like we do PG Tuesday here at Atrium. I think a bunch of our customers do that as well. And Tuesday's like particularly good for it because like Monday, most like on the prospect side, like everyone's in like internal operating rhythm meetings, and then also like your organization is probably in operating rhythm meetings as well. And so like Tuesday is good because like you put a bunch of activity out there, right? You like, and then it starts coming back that day. Wednesday, Thursday, you're setting meetings for the next week, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why Tuesday can be very helpful, but it could be Wednesday, probably not Thursday, right? But I think the important thing is setting a time and a date to do, because pipeline generation is like, it's another example of a thing that we ought to do, that everyone would agree that we ought to do, that ends up being effortful and like less pleasant than like having disco meetings or jumping on a down funnel call or whatever. And so having the discipline to say, hey, actually I'm going to block Tuesday for PG, and I'm actually not going to schedule meetings during it. I'm going to schedule meetings on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. That can be that can be tough to do from a discipline standpoint. But when organizations do that and then they bakes into their operating rhythm, they have their PG Tuesday stand up. What are you going to be doing? What's your PG program today? And then you report back at the end of the day, and then like you're actually held accountable to that from a leading indicator, like an activity metric standpoint, and then also a self-source pipe or self-source opportunity standpoint. It can be very powerful. So yeah, PG Tuesday, and I didn't come up with
PG
that.
Tuesday.
It's like a MongoDB kind of PTC, sort of like just a PG mindset, but cadencing it, right? Like we have a saying at Atrium that calendar is destiny. And so if it's not on the calendar and it's not baked into the operating rhythm, it's probably not going to happen. And so PG Tuesday is a great example of it. It like happens every Tuesday, like clockwork. We do our pipeline generation.
I like it. I like it. It also makes the hard thing a team sport, which I think humans just do better when we're
Totally.
in the
Yeah.
trenches doing the hard thing together.
Yep. Everyone's doing their PG today. This sucks, but it sucks for everyone. Yay.
Exactly. We're in it together. The PG Tuesday question, do you ever open that up? Is it just like revenue or like customer facing roles? I've often thought like, what if we did a day, a quarter where it's like everyone in the entire organization thought about this and it's just pipe gen. Even like our engineers probably know some buyers from like back in the day and like, let's just make it fun.
I mean, it's super interesting. Yeah. I think your product leaders would probably,
Be pissed.
they'd be like, don't talk to my engineers. But like, I think, customer success and account management, certainly.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
For sure.
I love it, man. Well, this has been a super fun conversation. I always appreciate
thanks
my
for having
time
me.
with you. Of course, man. And if people want to follow along, best way, LinkedIn, Twitter, what's the best way to get more Pete in their life?
Yeah, just Google Pete Kazanjy. Google will autocorrect the spelling for you, and then just click on the like top 3 links. It'll probably be Twitter, LinkedIn, and maybe my blog.
Love it. Awesome, man. Well, appreciate you. And for our listeners, I say it every week, listening's one thing, actually putting these into practice are something totally different. So hopefully we gave you some ideas, some thoughts to take into your organization. We'll see you next week.